Okay, so in this video in my series of videos leading up to Chris Eubank Jr vs Conor Benn on April 26, I'm going to be taking a look back at the time that Chris Eubank Jr fought an opponent in the early stages of his professional career, who actually went on to become popular amongst the British boxing public as a content creator after his fighting career came to a close, that being the ever controversial Tyan Booth. In regards to Tyan Booth's YouTube content creation, he was working with IFL TV around the mid-2010s, from about 2014 I think, and he actually conducted some interviews for IFL TV and did some solo and collaborative style talk shows for the channel. And if you somehow didn't know, IFL TV are the most well-renowned British boxing interview outlet on YouTube and have been for a while, and it is run by Kugan Cassius. And Kugan eventually went on to cut ties with Tyan Booth due to Tyan's controversial tweets. So basically Tyan Booth was sacked from IFL TV. Tyan Booth later gained YouTube fame with his own channel, Thai Boxing. This channel was hot in the late 2010s. I think it was really popping off in early 2019 if my timeline is correct here. However, his Thai Boxing channel went on to be permanently banned in February of 2020 for multiple violations of YouTube guidelines on sexual content. Very shortly after he was banned, in April of 2020, he came back with a bang and opened up his new channel, Thai FL TV. Good little play on words that. And Thai FL TV is still the channel that Tyan Booth produces content on to this day in 2025. Now that was just a quick gloss over there, but I'll get more into his content creation and how his boxing career came to a close after we take a look at his fight with Chris Eubank Jr. So Chris Eubank Jr and Tyan Booth fought each other in an 8-rounder on the 8th of June 2013 on a James DeGale undercard in Kent. And spoiler alert here, Eubank Jr would stop Tyan Booth in the 8th and final round. But there's a narrative out there that comes from Tyan Booth himself and a lot of boxing fans that Tyan Booth was beating Chris Eubank Jr in there and was really getting the better of things prior to the stoppage. So that's the main lens we're going to be looking at this fight through today. Was Tyan Booth completely outboxing and outscoring Eubank Jr in there? And did he have Eubank Jr in trouble at any point? Unfortunately, the official scorecards aren't actually on the BoxRec page and I can't find them anywhere else. So I don't know if Tyan Booth was actually winning on the cards or not after 7 rounds. But we'll see what it looks like when we look at the fight. This video today isn't one of them round for round scoring videos like I did for the Chris Eubank vs Nigel Benn 2 fight. Link for that one will obviously be in the description along with all of my other videos that I've done thus far in this series. But I'll quickly give my little 2 pence worth of who I think won each round after looking at how the fight played out. But before we look into the actual fight, I do want to provide a little bit of basic context going into the fight here. So at the point of this fight, Eubank Jr had only been pro for just over a year and a half, and he was a prospect with a record of 9-0 and of course had a fair bit of hype around him, for he was the son of the legendary Chris Eubank. And Eubank Jr had looked decent in his fights up to that point, but only 4 of his 9 wins came by stoppage, which isn't the best KO percentage for such a high profile prospect. And as for Tyan Booth now, I'd be remiss to not start out by saying that he took this fight with Eubank Jr on 4 days notice. So Booth came into this fight with a record of 11 wins, 9 losses and 2 draws. So quite the journeyman record one might say. But Booth was the level above your typical journeyman. It was a winning record at least, and he was a tall, awkward and tricky opponent who had previously boxed for area titles and the European middleweight title. And he had also previously stepped into fights as the B-side on short notice and upset the odds for the win. So I don't call him a journeyman to downplay how capable a boxer he was at all, but the fact that he would come in as a late notice opponent for the more well promoted boxers literally makes him a journeyman. And another thing that makes Tyan stick out from other journeymen is that he boxed out of the famous Ingle gym, where great fighters such as Prince Nassim Hamed, Johnny Nelson, Hewell Graham, Ryan Rhodes, Junior Witter and Kell Brook boxed out of. And fighters from that gym are known for their awkward style, and Tyan's physical gifts, i.e. his lanky frame, made him a really tricky customer. People forget, man. I mean, the man was 6'3", which is massive for a middleweight, and he'd actually fought at junior middleweight as well, which is insane. And Eubank Jr is 5'11", so big height advantage for Booth here. So of course, Eubank Jr was the A-side to a huge extent in this fight. It was on a Hennessy Promotions show, and Eubank Jr then boxed under the Hennessy banner, and he was the big name and the undefeated prospect. So Tyan was brought in to lose to Eubank Jr essentially. And on top of the fact that Booth took this fight on 4 days notice, he was also working full time outside of boxing, because as a journeyman, he was only boxing for a few poxy quid, one might say. But Eubank Jr on the other hand, he had all the time he needed to train. So needless to say, Eubank Jr was a heavy favourite. Well, I can't find what the actual betting odds were for this fight, but yeah, Eubank Jr was obviously very much expected to win this fight. But with all the things I said about Tyan being this big awkward Ingle gym fighter, I know this is easy to say in hindsight, but coming into this fight, this was Eubank Jr.'s toughest test to date at that point, in actuality. Maybe not on paper, but definitely style-wise. But let's finally get into the fight now. Okay, so round 1. In the first minute of round 1, both men tried to establish the jab. Due to Eubank Jr.'s significant height disadvantage, he's only committing to throwing them to the body, and they're not really landing. And Tyan Booth doesn't land any of his jabs, but him just prodding his long arm at Eubank is enough to cause Eubank a problem. First attempt at a power shot from Eubank Jr is a leaping left hook that Booth just steps out of the way of. Eubank evades all of the shots in Booth's combo here, but he isn't in position to counter. I know the evasive combination looks good here, but Eubank is having to do more work here to get low under the long punches of Booth, to where he's in a position where he can't throw back at Booth. Booth is just throwing his long arms at him and making him work. So another toolman thing here. Both men make contact to the body in this exchange. Booth throws a jab to back up Eubank, then unloads a combo on the guard of Eubank, and the right hand gets through. Clean right hand to the face from Booth there. Best shot of the round thus far. Bit of showmanship from Booth here. Bit more bravado as he talks to Eubank. Eubank just touches to the body here. Jab to the body from Booth. The two men meet in a clinch and Booth tries to rough him up. And then Tyan Booth has a little walkabout to close out the round. Cagey opening round here, and we can tell that the young prospect is in for a tricky night. Okay, second round we get some clinching early on. Both men throw jabs as Eubank lands one to the body. Then Eubank grazes Booth with a left hook, then throws another jab. More clinching here. Booth throws a combo which offsets Eubank, and a couple of these shots do appear to touch Eubank. Right hook to the body from Eubank lands, then the left misses wildly. Eubank lands a couple more to the body, then gets tied up by Booth. They meet in another clinch, and again with the clinching. Referee Ian John Lewis lets them throw a couple shots in the clinch this time. Booth throws a left hook, then they clinch again. Again with the holding from Booth. Eubank does look a tad uncomfortable here and unsure how to enter range to attack. He ducks under a Booth left hook, which leads to him being clinched again. Then he throws some rights to the body in the clinch, seemingly out of frustration. Eubank initiates a clinch this time as he knows he gets smothered when Booth comes in close anyway, and he throws some shots in this clinch as well. And that was it for round 2. So first 2 rounds, Tyan Booth definitely isn't beating up Eubank Jr, but Booth is giving Eubank a very tough time, to where the young prospect and the favourite in Eubank can't really find his rhythm at all to make a clean connection with a headshot, or to just land a couple shots within short succession or get a sustained attack going. Booth's range offsets Eubank's rhythm, and he smothers and holds Eubank in close, and Eubank struggles to do anything about it most of the time. So the tricky customer is doing tricky customer things in there, and the fight isn't going how Eubank Jr wants at this point. But remember, we're only 2 rounds in, to be fair. Alright, round 3, both men throw jabs early and neither land. Eubank doesn't let himself get smothered here, but shortly after Booth throws a left hook, then clinches him. Eubank with another wild miss with his left hook to the body, and Booth gives him a little look like, "What was that, mate?" Nice right uppercut from Booth here as Eubank is ducking too low to evade again. Landed clean to the face there. Booth pauses with some jabs, then clinches again, much to Eubank's dismay. Another clinch comes as a result of Eubank coming in to attack. The jabs keep Eubank guessing, but he manages to then get a couple taps to the body in. Good body shot from Eubank, then he grazes Booth with a right uppercut on the break. Booth taps up the guard of Eubank Jr here. Eubank touches him to the body. Neither men land here. They clinch again. Booth goes on the attack here and then clinches. The ref then tells him off for holding. Then Eubank remains persistent with the body attack. And then at the end of the round, Eubank's low evasions get him in an awkward position again. So to be honest, round 3 is the same as the first 2 rounds in that Eubank is outlanding Booth by getting these body shots in, but he's only having success downstairs, and Booth is frustrating him and making things awkward, and Eubank can't get any real significant and sustained attacks going. But in the third, it was just a slightly better pace than the second and first rounds, and Eubank's success to the body was turned up a bit. Typical start to the fourth as Eubank lands a couple jabs to the body, then Booth clinches him. More familiar scenes as Booth clinches as Eubank ducks his attack. Booth then roughs him up a bit. Eubank goes to the body and Booth touches him with a left hook to the chin. Bit of tussling and glove holding here. Booth's jab keeps Eubank guessing. The crowd weren't too fond of Eubank Jr.'s showboating here. He evades jabs, but it's a while till he throws back. Eubank attacks to the body, so Booth holds his head down. Booth taps up the guard of Eubank here. Eubank misses a shot to the body. Then Booth lands one to the face as Eubank ducks low. Booth just gets through with a right hand. More holding. Good left hook to the body from Eubank. Little walks about from Booth, and then a bit of showmanship from Eubank here too. More holding. Little exchange here, but neither men land clean. And a couple of body shots from Eubank to end out the round. Nothing much has changed again after the fourth. This really isn't the best fight. Eubank's success is still exclusively to the body, but he couldn't pick up from the success he had to the body in the prior round. Still some decent work though. And Booth's awkwardness is still making Eubank unsure of himself at times. And he manages to get some taps to the face of Eubank in this round that do score. Round 5. A few seconds in until the first clinch is initiated as Tyan smothers a low duck in Eubank. Same happens again a few seconds later. Both men go to the body and they tie up again. Neither men get off clean here. Booth connects on Eubank's guard with a left hook and tries to land a shot as Eubank evades. Eubank with a 1-2 to the body, then a left hook to the body. The left hook was blocked, but the 1-2 was probably the cleanest work of the round so far. Eubank Jr to the body again with a right left. Good work there. Booth can't hit Eubank Jr in here and looks tired as they clinch. Booth goes southpaw and lands a nice right hook here. Bit of the awkward man skill. Eubank lands to the body here. Booth tries to tie him up, but Eubank peppers the body, then goes upstairs with his shots. Booth tries to get to work in the clinch here, and we get a couple more clinch exchanges before the round is over. The two men stare each other out at the bell. So the first round of the second half of the fight is still competitive in there. Booth still making things awkward for Eubank. Still not the most fun fight, but the body shot from Eubank Jr, an investment he's been making since the opening round, is starting to pay off nicely. Best Eubank round of the fight so far. Round 6 starts like every other round. They tie up again here. Eubank gets out of the way of Booth's shots, then goes to the body. Comes up with a jab and Booth still can't land his shots. Eubank on the defensive here and Booth isn't as active with his punches at this point. Jab from Eubank. He comes forward with an attack. Another jab and he defends Booth's attacks again. Eubank Jr still honing in on the body well, and he backs Tyan Booth up to the ropes. Booth tries to hold as Eubank keeps on throwing. Neither men land with their shots here. Booth still can't hit Eubank here, and Eubank comes forward with a few power shots. The straight right and left landed there out of those shots. A little bit of showmanship from Eubank, and he goes for the left hook right hand, and he backs Booth up and lands a left hook to punctuate the round. So the first half of the fight was full of swing rounds that were tough to call, you know, the first 4 rounds. But that 6th round just there was the second convincing Eubank round in a row, and things were going in his favour at this point. I wouldn't say that Booth is boxing that much worse as the fight goes on, although he probably was tired at this point. But yeah, I reckon Eubank just started to do a better job of figuring him out. Round 7, Chris Eubank lands a good 2-piece to the body early. Eubank makes Booth miss, then backs him up with some big shots, but none of them land clean here thanks to Booth's slipperiness. Eubank stays aggressive as Booth tries to tie him up. Booth tries to rough up Eubank in the clinch, but we see that a cut has formed above Booth's eye, probably from a grazing right hand that Eubank landed shortly before. Eubank targets the cut with another big right. A couple more big right hands thrown by Eubank. Tyan Booth taps up Eubank's guard. Eubank backs him up with a body attack. Keeps backing him up, throwing power shots. Booth goes southpaw, but he can't do anything in the opposite stance this time around. Booth holds on and looks tired here. Eubank makes Booth miss with all of his shots again, then pops up with his own attack. Still in pursuit of Tyan, so Tyan looks to hold. Booth's tricky customer ways aren't bothering Eubank anymore at this point. A nice body shot gets through for Booth on this attack, and he goads Eubank on to exchange. Eubank then backs a tired Booth up with power shots and stays on the attack until the end of the round. So yeah, remember in the early stages of the fight, Eubank had trouble figuring out this tricky unorthodox opponent. But there in the 7th round, his pressure and body assaults looked to have paid off, and he was fully the aggressor there, outworking Tyan to a great extent. Tyan managed to make it tricky and was kind of making it boring early on in the fight. He was keeping Eubank at bay and then clinching in close. But that 7th round just there, Eubank was just sort of beating Tyan Booth up. Okay, the 8th and final round now. Eubank to the body early again, so Booth ties him up. Booth does try to land some shots of his own here, but Eubank comes off looking the better again, backing him up with body shots. Couple of nice left hooks to the body from Eubank here. Gotta be taking the wind out of Tyan Booth there. Another lovely left hook to the body. Booth retreating and holding. He seems to not want it anymore. Eubank persistent with the attack as Booth tries to smother him. Booth throws to no avail again. Pats up Eubank's guard a bit, then gets out of the way of Eubank's shots this time. Clubbing right hand from Eubank and Booth holds. Overhand right from Eubank, the follow-up shots miss. Similar thing again here, and Booth holds again. Eubank's not having any of Booth's holding here as he beats him up to the body, then backs him up with some headshots. Booth holds on for dear life. The ref breaks him. A ferocious attack from Eubank here in pursuit of the finish. Makes connection with a couple of uppercuts, and Booth looks completely dishevelled here, so referee Ian John Lewis stops the bout, meaning a TKO victory for Eubank. Chris Eubank Jr. stopped Tyan Booth in the final minute of the final round. So yeah, that was a good win for Chris Eubank Jr. early in his career there. Not the biggest win on paper, of course, against a guy who barely had a winning record, but it was good because he overcame a fairly tough test. Tyan would just not let Eubank find his rhythm early on, and I know that I said that Tyan Booth is objectively a journeyman, and journeyman is who fighters tend to face in their early career, but Tyan himself claims that he wasn't a journeyman. He made a good point about most journeymen turning up to a fight being happy to show up just to lose to get their few poxy £100, but Tyan Booth said that he went in there to try and win when he fought. So Eubank Jr. had a game opponent in front of him. And you could say, why give a young Eubank Jr. credit for this win when Booth had lost to and even been stopped by less than stellar opponents? But again, he had also come in as the away fighter many times and actually won fights or got robbed on the cards. And most of all, when it comes to boxing, we can talk all day about a win being not so good because of an opponent's failures that came before and after a particular fight. But at the end of the day, you're facing the version of that fighter who stands in front of you that night. And in this case, I think Eubank was in there with one of, if not the best versions of Tyan Booth in terms of his efforts on fight night. I mean, Booth was fighting a guy with the last name Eubank. I'm sure he was going to show up as the best version of himself that he possibly could, as he knew there'd be eyes on the fight. And perhaps Tyan Booth was at his best at the middleweight division. And again, credit goes to Tyan Booth himself for putting up such a fight against Eubank Jr. on 4 days notice while he was working full time and didn't have the training that Eubank had. In terms of how I scored the fight though, look, the BoxRec fan scoring has Tyan Booth winning all of the first 4 rounds. Again, I unfortunately couldn't find the official cards anywhere, but let's say those fan scores reflected what the official cards were. Then if Eubank didn't get that knockout with 30 seconds to go, or that TKO, the bout would have been declared a draw. But to get more pragmatic about this fight now, I personally only gave Tyan Booth round 1 and round 4. Rounds 2, 3 and 4 were all close, but there's no point in me going into detail about my rationale for the scoring because this isn't a scoring video, for the fact that the fight didn't even reach the final bell. But the way I see it, round 1 was the only clear Booth round, and he gave Eubank a tough time for the next 3 rounds, but he wasn't dominating or anything, and I literally only scraped the 4th round to Booth, and from round 5 onwards, it was all Eubank. Everything was going downhill for Booth in the second half of the fight, with being hurt to the body and everything. But if you heard some of the narratives around this fight, you'd think that Tyan Booth was about to knock Eubank Jr. out at one point or something, but Booth never even had Eubank Jr. hurt at any point, to be honest. And you also may think that Booth was ahead on the cards at the point of the stoppage if you have heard the way that this fight has been spoken about but you haven't seen it. But again, giving him the first 4 rounds is even quite debatable, so a win on the cards was impossible. And he got stopped anyway, so what does it matter? That's no knock on Tyan, that's just a pragmatic take on the fight. And in regards to the scoring, I imagine that the official judges would not have given Tyan Booth the first 4 rounds. Rounds that close, they're not going to give it to the B-side, are they? If Booth survived in the final round, it undoubtedly would have still been a Eubank Jr. win on the cards. And even if the whole fight looked like how the first 4 rounds did, the judges more than likely would have still given it to Eubank Jr., let alone Eubank Jr. dominating the whole second half of the fight in reality. So all in all, this fight wasn't even close. At the time, it would have been interesting to see a prospect struggle early on in the fight, although that is common in boxing, and in hindsight, it is interesting to see someone who went on to be more famous for his content creation give such a big name in boxing a tough time for a few rounds. And with the whole A-side, B-side thing, it's not like this was some crossroads fight, because let alone the fact that Booth could have won 5 or 6 rounds and then got robbed on the cards, which he didn't even come close to doing anyway, even if he actually beat Eubank Jr., they probably would have ran it back and Eubank Jr. would have won the rematch. That's always been a common trope in boxing, the young prospect getting their win back before they move on with their career. But here's one clip of what Tyan Booth had to say about his loss to Eubank Jr. from his channel TFL TV.
That should be me there with those fucking women, man. I still can't believe I didn't win that fight. I just chucked it down the drain, man. That should be me there with all those fucking women, do you know what I mean? That was a wasted opportunity. I should have ended him, you know, before he even got going in boxing. I should have finished him. Yeah, I fucked up. Fucking Coogan.
And to go back to Tyan Booth being an Ingle gym fighter, to reference a really good point made by Based Boxing Basement, an underrated content creator on the YouTube boxing scene. Now, I can't find the video he said this in, but he was speaking about the fact that Ingle gym fighters are indeed known for their awkward style. And he referenced Ingle gym fighter Harold Bomber Graham taking on Julian the Hawk Jackson in a vacant world title fight. Now, when it comes to that fight, a lot of boxing fans talk about how Harold Graham was dominating that fight before getting knocked out in the 4th round. But Based Boxing Basement was just sort of saying, what does it matter? These Ingle gym fighters are capable of making it a tough fight for anyone with their awkward style, but what does that matter when you end up getting knocked out? Because of how good Harold Graham was and how well he was doing in that fight, it is understandable that fans say, oh, he just had to keep his concentration and he would have been a world champion. But you do have to realise that that same awkward style that allows him to have success, you know, with his chin in the air, throwing unorthodox punches, you know, that awkward style and the way he defends punches and pulls back from shots with his chin in the air, it's that same unorthodox style that got him knocked out at the end of the day. And he also brought up Kell Brook versus Golovkin. Brook was giving Golovkin work and was ahead on one of the official scorecards, the other 2 cards being even after 4 rounds. But the Ingle gym fighter in Brook ended up getting stopped, so what did it matter in the end? So similar thing for Tyan Booth here, you know, in this fight against Chris Eubank Jr. He is always going to have some spell of success with his awkward style, but what does it matter when you wind up getting stopped, or when the fight starts going wrong for you way before you even get stopped? But yeah, Triple B made that point in a video about Kell Brook, but as I said, I just can't find that video. It probably got taken down. But that was an eloquently put point from Triple B. Accuracy. And just to give my own little example, in regards to me saying that even if the whole 8 rounds looked like how the first 4 rounds did, Eubank Jr would have still won on the cards, and the fact that Tyan Booth had been robbed in fights in the past, you know, the whole thing of him, you know, not being able to actually win rounds officially, is also a familiar scene for an Ingle gym fighter, unfortunately. You look to Ingle gym fighter Kid Galahad. People say he was robbed in the Josh Warrington fight, but at the end of the day, he just didn't do enough to win convincingly. By the way, all of this is not a diss on the Ingle gym by any means. I'm a big fan of all of their fighters, and I admire their achievements greatly. I'm definitely not saying that they're just defined by, you know, fumbling fights and, you know, losing close decisions. Dominic Ingle is a solid trainer, and of course Brendan Ingle was a legendary trainer, may God rest his soul. But that was just a bit of interesting context that I thought I'd put out there. Like, as much as people might not take Tyan Booth seriously, you put a prime Tyan Booth in there with Canelo. With Booth's awkward style, he gives Canelo at least 3 tricky rounds before getting knocked out, I'd say. But yeah, maybe I'm taking this all a bit too seriously. Maybe it's just Tyan Booth himself who felt like he was trending in the right direction in that Eubank Jr fight, and other people just go along with it because it's amusing that this fight ever even happened, given Tyan Booth's endeavours after boxing. Maybe the people who gave Tyan Booth 4 rounds on BoxRec are just TFL TV fans, and I'm reading into all of this a bit too much. But maybe people really do believe that an in-shape Tyan Booth would have been capable of keeping up his good work in there and nicking the fight against Eubank Jr on the cards, or maybe even stopping him, but I personally don't know how anyone could see that. And in terms of the scorecards, you know, maybe I've got a really deluded and skewed take and I don't know how to call a fight to save my life. Perhaps you definitely do give Tyan Booth rounds 1 to 4, and there's even a case for giving him rounds 5, round 6. Maybe I'm just being really dichotomous by saying that Eubank Jr dominated the second half of the fight, you know. Perhaps Tyan Booth was really in it until the final round and I'm just failing to see it that way. But yeah, I'm not here trying to debunk the fact that Booth was doing well against Eubank Jr or anything, but prospects have tough fights against journeymen all the time. This one just sticks out due to Booth's later popularity as an internet sensation. But I suppose that's a good thing. You know, that's the magic of Tyan Booth, that we get to listen to all of his stories about taking fights on short notice and not getting paid properly. You know, because of that, he's become a real voice for the voiceless, touching on the plights of a journeyman or a B-side boxer from a first-hand perspective. Now, in terms of Chris Eubank Jr and Tyan Booth's respective career paths after fighting each other, well, Chris Eubank Jr was and will obviously continue to be a big name, for he is the son of Chris Eubank. But many would argue that boxing-wise, Tyan Booth giving Eubank Jr problems in that fight would go on to be no surprise. Because it's not as if Tyan Booth boxed a guy who went on to be an undefeated world-class fighter or anything. Eubank Jr would take his first loss less than a year and a half after the Tyan Booth fight, when he lost to Billy Joe Saunders in a British, Commonwealth and European middleweight title fight. So Eubank Jr lost before stepping up to world level anyway. Well, obviously Saunders would go on to be world level, but yeah. And after that 2014 loss to Saunders, he would go on to win the British middleweight title in 2016 with a superb performance against Nick Blackwell, and he put another few decent wins together. But he would meet his match again in 2018 when challenging George Groves for his WBA World Super Middleweight title. And when he lost to Groves, this created a narrative that Eubank Jr was always destined to lose when he stepped up to the big stage. And since that 2018 loss, he had gained a couple of decent victories here and there, and of course suffered a stoppage loss, his first ever stoppage loss, to Liam Smith, a loss which he avenged in an immediate rematch. Also, just to note, Eubank Jr has gained the honour of being a 3-time IBO world champion throughout his career, winning the belt twice at super middleweight and once at middleweight. But as we know, the IBO belt is not recognised as a legit world title, and I do look to do a video on the IBO belt soon as a part of this Ben vs Eubank series, so please do subscribe if you aren't already and would be interested in that IBO video. But anyway, we could ramble about Eubank Jr.'s resume all day. Let's now take a look at how Tyan Booth's career came to an end now. So, it was actually a tragic event that led to Tyan Booth's career coming to an end in 2018. But let's take a look at the stuff in the between time anyway. So after fighting Eubank Jr, Booth would go on to rematch Ryan Aston after their first fight back in 2012 resulted in a technical draw after Ryan Aston was cut from an accidental head clash. And guess what? Their rematch in 2013 would also end in a draw. A 6-round draw on the scorecards this time around. I just watched that fight back on YouTube now. Terrible watch, I'll be real. But there is a case for a Tyan Booth win in that fight. Ryan was the A-side fighter and Booth successfully gave him a tricky night's work like he knows best. And this was a short notice fight as well. Oh, and by the way, after that Ryan Aston rematch, Tyan Booth had his first ever IFL TV interview with none other than Kugan Cassius. After that Ryan Aston draw, Tyan Booth boxed Liam Williams, a name I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and this fight also ended in a technical draw after Booth was cut from an accidental head clash. Head clashes are a common theme in Tyan Booth fights, huh? And after the Williams fight, in 2014, he would suffer his 4th career stoppage loss to Damon Jones, and this loss to Damon Jones would be followed up by just over 3 years of inactivity, as in time out of the ring. Now during this time, Tyan Booth was working with IFL TV, and Tyan spoke in an interview with Sporting Icons about how in that time period he was drinking and living the party life and all that, and that's why he fell off from boxing and had that inactivity. So yeah, he was doing content and also getting pissed a lot. Oh, and by the way, I mentioned his YouTube content creation earlier in the video, but in that time period that he was working with IFL TV, he was also doing a radio show, and he later revealed in an interview with Uncle T Boxing that he was kicked off the radio for speaking about how women love rough, hardcore sex. So yeah, he's always had a thing for getting kicked off of platforms, I guess. Bad for business, one might say. RIP Heavy D, by the way. But yeah, after that 3-year layoff, doing IFL TV videos, doing radio, getting drunk and smashing broads, he would come back to fight the 10-0 Onda Ozgul in a 4-rounder in York Hall. This was in May of 2017, and he took Ozgul to a 4-round draw. A fight that many people reckon Tyan Booth was robbed in. So yeah, coming in as the B-side again and being on the receiving end of a dodgy decision. Then just a month later, he boxed the matchroom fighter Marcus Morrison in a 4-rounder, and he actually won a 4-round decision over the Eddie Hearn prospect Marcus Morrison. And that was Tyan Booth's last licensed professional bout to date. So he's spoken about how he struggled to get fights because he'd get in there and give prospects and their promoters nightmares with his tricky style. And to be fair, if I was a promoter, unless my fighter was an absolute killer sparking everyone out, I wouldn't match them with Tyan Booth. For him to stink the place out and make my guy look like rubbish. It's a long day. So yeah, he was inactive for a while after the Marcus Morrison fight anyway. But let's take a look at how he actually lost his British Boxing Board of Control licence in 2018, at a time that he apparently did have a fight scheduled. Alright, so on the 25th of February 2018, Scott Westgarth tragically passed away as a result of his fight with Dexter the day before. May he rest in peace and may his legacy live on. He actually won the fight on points against Spellman to become the #1 contender for the English light heavyweight title, and Westgarth survived a knockdown in the 10th and final round. But immediately after that fight, there was that famous post-fight interview in which Westgarth started blinking heavily and holding his head in pain. After this, he would collapse backstage, and when he woke up, He was vomiting and complained about his head killing him. He was then rushed off to the hospital where he lost consciousness again. His condition never improved and he was pronounced dead as a result of a huge bleed on the brain the very next day. So how does this link to Tyan Booth? Well, remember how I spoke about how Tyan Booth was always getting kicked off of media platforms for his words? This time, his words lost him his boxing license. So Tyan Booth put out a tweet shortly after Westgarth's death saying, "Some people would enjoy it if I got killed in a boxing ring like Scott Westgarth. #man down." It was this along with the tweet to promote his next fight that read, "There's a good chance I'll end up in a wheelchair like Gerald McClellan, so tune in," that got Booth suspended. I'm going to make the educated guess that the loss of his license was mainly due to the Scott Westgarth comments, as that situation was so recent at the time, and the boxing world along with Westgarth's family were still very much mourning and processing Westgarth's tragic death. I mean, Booth's suspension was reported on February 27th and Westgarth passed away on the 25th, so it's fair to assume that Booth made this tweet within a day of Westgarth's passing and was subsequently suspended by the British Boxing Board of Control within a day of the tweet. Now, I've already spoken about the Gerald McClellan situation at length in that Family Affairs video, so link will be in the description obviously. So let's focus more on the Westgarth tweet here. But what I will say on McClellan is that in that Family Affairs video, I was accused of defending Gerald McClellan himself for his alleged animal abuse, which I wasn't actually doing. And I'm not about to defend Tyan Booth for his comments on Scott Westgarth here, nor his comments on Gerald McClellan, but just because I don't wish for someone to be stripped of their health and or livelihood for their actions or words, it doesn't mean I'm defending them for said actions or words. What Tyan Booth said was wrong. He used somebody's death flippantly in a tweet to get social media attention, and the #man down was very insensitive. He spoke ill of the dearly departed, at a time that the death was very recent and his family were at the early stages of grieving. And when a tragic situation is so recent, we know it is a lot more sensitive. I mean, we saw Irish boxer John Cooney pass away just 2.5 months ago as of this recording, which I've mentioned already in this series. So prayers go out to John Cooney's family. And of course, if another boxer was to make a social media comment like that about Cooney, they would rightfully be one of the most hated people in boxing right now. But here's the thing, I personally do not agree with a boxer losing their license or even being fined due to their words at all, no matter how much I disagree with those words or other people are offended by those words. I know this is so very different, but the BBBOC fining Liam Smith 20 grand for his merely suggestive comments towards Eubank Jr at that press conference was absolutely ridiculous. But Robert Smith of the BBBOC loves fining people, don't he? You know, you've also got that egg slap thing, whatever happened there. But to use a more pertinent example from a different combat sport, UFC President Dana White rightfully stands for free speech, and he's always said that no matter how wrong some fighters' words are, at the end of the day, they're gonna get in the cage and put it all on the line. So it's on their opponent to punish them for those words. But of course, that is mainly applicable to offensive words being directed towards the opponent they are contracted to fight. But recently, we had the Bryce Mitchell situation. Mitchell had made controversial statements about a certain historical event, rather than comments directed at an opponent. And Dana White publicly condemned Mitchell for his words, but he did not dish out any punishment. No fine, no suspension, or anything, which he was criticised for. He basically said that you're just going to have to tune in and hope that he gets messed up in the cage in his next fight. And Bryce Mitchell did in fact go on to get choked unconscious in his next fight after making those comments, which did good for Dana White's philosophy there. I was personally rooting for Bryce Mitchell in that fight, but yeah. So what does all that Dana White stuff have to do with Tyan Booth speaking ill of the death of another boxer? Or speaking flippantly of it? He didn't really insult Westgarth, it was just very insensitive. So when it comes to speaking about the death of a boxer, in any tone, I think that it's fellow boxers who have the most right to speak on it, as they are risking their lives every time they get in the ring themselves. And especially someone like a Tyan Booth. He took fights on short notice all throughout his career, and probably had to cut loads of weight in short spaces of time. I mean, the guy's like 6'3", and he's fought as low as welterweight. And when he got chinned by Darren Geffen, that one was down at 147, and the weight cut may very well have affected Booth's performance in there and led to him getting stopped. I mean, look at the veins in his head after he got knocked out. And I've spoken in a recent video about weight cuts being a big cause for boxer deaths, and as a journeyman, again no disrespect intended there, Booth would have fights within short succession of each other and sometimes move down in weight from the weight he fought at in the previous fight. And that, coupled with the fact that he took a bunch of losses and got stopped a few times in his career, means that Tyan Booth was very much putting it all on the line in his career and very easily could have died in the ring himself. I mean, he's probably flirted with the idea based on those tweets, and deep down, most boxers are ready to die in there. Of course, we hope they don't die though. So does the fact that he's a boxer himself excuse him for speaking ill of the dead? No. But to bring this back to Dana White's philosophy, seen as Booth's comments towards the death of a boxer were offensive in nature, and I'm sure most of the boxing community, including fellow boxers, would have been displeased with Booth's words, let Booth get in the ring then, and other fighters can punish him for those words. I know that for him to box on means he'd still be getting paid after bringing attention to himself by making offensive comments towards the dearly departed, but he trains to make money through fighting, not to be kind in his public speech. And the growth of Thai Boxing TV, and later Thai FL TV, came off the back of Booth's professional boxing career coming to a close, and many people have been very offended by the words that Tyan Booth has said on those channels. So little did the British Boxing Board of Control know, by suspending Tyan Booth from professional boxing, they created a bigger monster in a sense, if you are one to be offended by Tyan's words. And as for him being punished by a lack of income after his boxing suspension, well, them Hex Toys donations on his YouTube streams are probably higher sums of money than he made to box. So yeah, if Tyan Booth was allowed to continue in professional boxing, then he could have died as a result of injuries sustained in the ring himself. You know, maybe karma would have got him, as some people like to say. That's what people are saying in my comments about Gerald McClellan, that his permanent injuries from the Nigel Benn fight is karma for the dogfighting, an opinion that Tyan Booth himself holds. Karma is a Hindu belief, I think, so yeah, I didn't know we had so many Hindus around. So yeah, after the comments about Westgarth, if Tyan Booth did go on to die in the ring himself, then all of you Hindus would have had a field day then, I guess. And remember, Booth's tweet did actually say, some people would enjoy it if I got killed in a boxing ring like Scott Westgarth. So yeah, boxers speaking about other boxers dying or being permanently injured is different to normal people talking about the matter, due to the fact that they probably flirt with the idea a lot themselves. You know, remember Deontay Wilder after knocking out Helenius? He was absolutely bursting into tears while referencing the Pritchard Cologne incident. And that incident was 7 years old at that point. And we've even seen Mike Tyson say in a post-fight interview that he's in a hurry to die. And back to Gerald McClellan, who does keep coming up in this video, aside from his dog abuse or Tyan Booth's comments on him now. So I mentioned in my previous video that according to McClellan's trainer Stan Johnson, a few days before McClellan's fateful fight with Nigel Benn in London, he looked at the memorial statue of one Bradley Stone outside of the Peacock Gym and said, "I'd rather go out like Bradley Stone than get knocked out." By the way, Bradley Stone was a professional boxer who died as a result of injuries sustained in the ring just 10 months prior to the Benn vs McClellan fight. And McClellan, who had never been stopped before in a professional fight at the point of uttering those words, was saying that due to his competitive nature. And I didn't bring that up to make McClellan look bad or disrespectful at all. This may sound weird to some of you, but I think that's quite a beautiful thing to say. Bradley Stone went out on his shield doing what he loved, and as a fighting man, McClellan probably made that comment to express the fact that he literally couldn't live with being knocked out, so he'd rather go out the way Bradley Stone did. And to be honest, with the way some other people have died, outside of boxing, I won't go into too much detail, but I'd personally rather go out like Bradley Stone than go out like a lot of other people have. There are way worse ways to die than dying in a boxing ring. He went out doing what he loved, as I said. And you know, back in 2019, we saw Patrick Day tragically pass away as a result of his fight with Charles Conwell. Well, I was reading comments of the highlights of that fight, and a commenter who claimed to be Patrick's cousin spoke about the fact that Patrick died doing what he loved. And funnily enough, when Gerald McClellan was being stretchered out of the arena after that Nigel Benn fight, we could visibly see Gerald McClellan take his gas mask off his mouth to speak, and according to his trainer Stan Johnson, McClellan was asking if he got knocked out in the fight. So that competitiveness was priority over his health for him. And when it comes to Scott Westgarth himself, when he was being stretchered out of the venue after the Spellman fight, his father claims that his last words to him was, "I'm not getting on that like a twat," as in getting on the stretcher. I can't lie, those are some pretty legendary last words from Scott. So it's do or die for boxers when they get in there, and it's what they sign up to. Does that excuse Tyan Booth for making flippant comments about a deceased boxer? No. But to go back to Deontay Wilder, before he took psychedelics and all that, he would constantly bang on about wanting a body on his record, as in wanting to kill another fighter in the ring. I know it's different with Tyan because he's speaking about someone who actually did die, but the principle stands. Boxing is kill or be killed, and the fighters are the gladiators in the arena, so I believe that their words about fighter death should be left alone in regards to public scrutiny or cancel culture. I mean, unless you're directly insulting and harassing the family and friends of the deceased fighter or something, And although Tyan Booth was being very insensitive, he wasn't doing that by any stretch. And although this fact also speaks to Tyan Booth posting this tweet for attention, at the time of Westgarth's passing, the death of Scott Westgarth would have been a way more popular topic in the news than Tyan Booth's Twitter. So it's not as if his insensitivities created an overarching disregard towards Westgarth's death. I'm sure most people were sending the Westgarth family their best wishes and publicly expressing their condolences. And to go back to the UFC stuff, what Sean Strickland said that one time in that Media Day interview about that Brazilian fighter who got hit by a bus and died, may God rest his soul, was way worse than Tyan Booth's comments on Westgarth. And Sean Strickland as a public figure was way more popular than the death of that fighter, so that particular death was highlighted in the wrong way, unlike Westgarth's. Scott Westgarth's legacy is not dominated or tainted by Tyan Booth's comments. You know, if you're a Tyan Booth fan, then hearing the name Scott Westgarth may make you think of Tyan Booth, but if you actually just search up Scott Westgarth's name, you'll be scrolling for a while before you see something about Tyan Booth. So people dying as a result of injuries sustained in the boxing ring is a sensitive topic, and as much as some of you might like to keep it light-hearted and talk about less hefty topics, the tragic side of the sport is indeed a major part of the sport. So RIP Scott Westgarth, RIP Bradley Stone, RIP John Cooney, RIP Patrick Day, and RIP to all the other boxers that passed away as a result of injuries sustained within the squared circle. May all their legacies live on. And as for the likes of Gerald McClellan and Pritchard Colon, I hope that their families can continue to give them the best quality of life possible, and I hope that the families themselves can have the best quality of life possible in caring for their permanently impaired loved one. But the fundamental question is, do I think that Tyan Booth should have been suspended from boxing for his tweets about Scott Westgarth and Gerald McClellan? No, I do not. Alright, that was a bit hefty. I was meant to mention Tyan Booth's tweet about Scott Westgarth as quick context to talk about how Booth's career ended. I didn't intend to go on that much about fighter deaths and stuff, I'll be real, but this sort of stuff has come up a lot in this series, and I did just want to sort of touch on how Scott Westgarth's legacy lives on and pay respects and all that. So on a more light-hearted note, let's take a look at what Tyan Booth's YouTube content actually consists of. Well, some people might not consider the content to be light-hearted at all, but Booth does produce some pretty funny videos on his TyFL TV channel. So he's been very inactive with his posts over the last year, but Booth does streams and edited videos. I was going to refer to the edited videos as video essays, but the beauty of it is that they are unscripted and off the dome, but due to his database of knowledge on boxing and his dry humour, it all works pretty well, and the edited videos are way better than the streams. As somebody who was on the scene and trained in such a famous gym, he can recall lesser known interesting boxing affairs from the past, and I reckon this is also due to him being well read. He also has these little beefs with other figures in boxing, and whether or not these beefs make him seem bitter or like a hater or whatever, they are just funny for the most part. He's got gimmicks for all his ops. He's got a bunch of gimmicks for his biggest op, Kugan Cassius, the pouting lips, bent legs, Ramin and Nathan and all that. You've got the O'Hara Davis stuff, the black quitter who conveniently popped off to Spain, Amir Khan the Skype wanker. He's got a massive beef with Carl the Contradiction Froch, his old pal from Nottingham, and I do reckon that Carl Froch is still ducking Tyan Booth to this day. You've got the Anna Willow stuff with the BJ signals, if I can say that, the Michelle Joy Phelps stuff. He's got a little nickname for her that I'm not going to risk saying because I do rely on the few poxy quid I make from these videos. He goes in on Sonny Edwards as well, and Anthony Joshua. AJ actually kicked Booth out of the gym for saying stuff about him in his videos. So after getting kicked out of the gym, Booth only started going in on AJ more in his videos, of course. Oh, and how could I forget? AKA Skins. That stuff is gold. But yeah, there's many more little gimmicks he has on his channel. And I personally don't have anything against the people that he violates in his videos, but the way he does it is just funny. Oh, and Status of a Plum, of course. That's probably the most goated gimmick on the internet. The gimmicks that Tyan Booth has made has actually had quite a big impact on the British boxing YouTube scene for 6-7 years now, I think. You'll see his quotes all in the comments on interview pages and stuff. So obviously this video right now is part of the Eubank vs Ben series I'm doing, and Tyan Booth himself also has very interesting insights on all things Eubank Ben, especially because he is a former opponent of Eubank Jr, the very reason for this video. And I did play a little clip earlier of one thing he said about losing to Eubank Jr, and now I was scrolling through and rewatching some of his old videos considering making a supercut of every time he spoke about Eubank Jr, but it would have been way too long, and it's all gold so I wouldn't know what to choose from, so for those interested you have to check it out for yourselves. Each of his video titles and thumbnails will be based on something that was news at the time, but when you click on them, he talks about a bunch of other stuff in there, and yeah, there's common themes that come up like Eubank Jr, like Cougan Cassius and all that. So yeah, I'll link his channel down below, why not. I don't know the guy, he obviously has never heard of me, he has 10 times the amount of subscribers as me, but with me talking about him this much, I'm sure if this video is reaching out to anyone who doesn't know him, and again, my audience is very unpredictable, so it very well may be, then, you know, I'm sure you guys will be getting curious, like, what's this guy all about? So yeah, free plug, but obviously it's only right if I link it talking about it this much. And I'd be remiss to not mention the fact that Tyan Booth's content is very risque, and he does talk about crazy topics, which is a major part of what makes him unique on the YouTube boxing space. As for him always getting banned or demonetized for sexual content, it's because his editing style entails always having some scantily clad women shown on screen for viewer attention, which is up to him to take the gamble, risking his videos getting demonetized. But if them videos are monetized, then he'll be getting more ad revenue for the watch time. I personally wouldn't go that particular route with the scantily clad women, but it's part of his style, innit? And it's probably how much detail he goes into when talking about sexual matters and all of that stuff. Some of the stuff he talks about are things that I personally don't find that absurd, but I just wouldn't risk it myself on this YouTube platform because I am a broke bum and I need to save up for a better device to edit on, and I need to afford that good frozen food. I'm free speech at the end of the day, but YouTube is YouTube and you gotta stay within the guidelines if you want to make money. So I rate Tyan Booth for his high risk approach, but at the same time, I don't sympathise with him too much for ever being banned or demonetized. Now, me and my good friend Let Me Save You have spoken in length about this matter. He has a second channel called Code of K, which I'll link in the description, and he does Dexter video essays on there, which is quite a wild show from what I know. And we know that in this Eubank Ben series I'm doing now, I've spoken about some crazy topics, but my pal has spoken to me about how he mitigates risk in his Dexter videos by not specifically referring to the crimes that people commit on the show, and he refrains from showing clips of the kills and all of that stuff, which I also respect highly. He should be staying on the straight and narrow path in regards to earning on YouTube. So I'm more high risk than him, and I've always said to my boy, if any of my videos get taken down when I know I've said the mad thing, then I won't really complain, I'll just have to tone it down the next time or whatever. But yeah, do go check out my mate's channel and get him up to 1k subs. I don't even watch Dexter, and I still enjoy his videos, and I'm sure a bunch of you do watch Dexter because I'm finding out that it is very popular. There's some great analysis on the law on there, and they're short and sweet unlike my videos. So yeah, Tyan Booth's videos are a bit sleazy and risky and all that. And if you ain't heard of his channel before and check out his channel after getting to the end of this video, I'll be sending you down some rabbit hole, believe me. I'm a free speech kind of guy, so I'm definitely not offended by anything that Tyan says in the slightest, but some of his stuff does weird me out a little bit, I can't lie. Some of the stuff he said about incest, for example, crazy. I could make a whole supercut of his incest stuff, but yeah, I'd rather not. But yeah, it's not all just sleazy stuff and insulting people and all that. There are some decent boxing takes on there that I personally am not qualified to give because I haven't been in the boxing game paying my dues like him, so I'll give the respect there. Now, just because someone boxes professionally, it definitely doesn't mean that they're entitled to the respect of the general public, because who even cares about boxing for the most part, and it's people's choice to box. But for someone like me who spends most of his time talking about and watching boxing and makes a little bit of pocket change from it, I'll personally always give respect to the fighters, innit, no matter who they are. But yeah, the guy's content is very degenerate and all that, but again, if you do go watch it, then don't take it too seriously. Just have a little laugh and you'll get nice little gems of knowledge here and there. Again, most of you probably will have already seen his stuff because of his influence over the British boxing YouTube space, but I do reach an international audience sometimes, so perhaps some of you haven't heard of him. Alright, I'm gonna wrap up. I'll be honest, this video has been a bit all over the place because I'm not really sure what audience I'm reaching at all. If you look at the inconsistent view counts on my videos and my viewer to subscriber ratio and all that, you'll realise that I actually have no idea who I'm talking to when I make these videos. So I might just get a few hundred of my subscribers watching this video, and I do appreciate you guys a lot. I might get a few thousand little Tyan Booth fans watching this video. Or this video could hit the algorithm like mad and reach a worldwide audience who are only hearing about Tyan Booth for the first time from this very video. That's why I wasn't sure how inside I was going to go with all of the references and all that. Like, I was even going to call this video When Chris Eubank Jr. Fought a YouTuber - a review, a nod to Tyan Booth's own style of title, but I had to keep the title short for the algo. You know, the clickbait is important here. Now, the one way I do try to conduct these videos is in order to provide value. In this case, the value would be a short analysis of the Chris Eubank Jr. versus Tyan Booth fight, to sum it up for those who did know that this fight happened and were always curious about exactly how this fight went down but could never be asked to watch it, because it was quite the boring fight, to be honest. And I did manage to run the fight down in like 10 minutes, but this video just ended up being way too long. Like, I went on about the Scott Westgarth tweet for longer than I spoke about the actual fight, and that was not intended. I'm just a top waffler, and then I have to do extra editing to make up for that extra waffling. With the length of this video, I might as well just have done a whole documentary on Tyan Booth. There's loads of stuff about him that I've either missed or haven't covered, which if this video is reaching out to any of his die-hard fans, I'm sure they'll let me know about it in the comments. But yeah, this isn't even a doc. I just waffled on too much about the contextual factors that I did cover. So yeah, this video has of course been a part of my series in which I cover all things Eubank vs Ben, and it's gone completely left field again. So check out all the links in the description for them other videos in this series. Even though I am a casual fan and can't call a fight to save my life, if you did happen to enjoy the way I clipped up that Eubank Jr versus Booth fight and commentated over it, then please check out how I scored Nigel Benn vs Chris Eubank 2 if you haven't already.
But the views are embarrassing. That's why I'm trying to plug it now.
And please do subscribe if you haven't already to stay tuned for however many more videos I do manage to get up before this Chris Eubank Jr versus Conor Benn fight coming up. The fight's really getting closer now, so I don't think I'll be able to get up all the videos that I plan to in preview of this fight, because these videos just take ages to edit. But yeah, leave your thoughts in the comments down below, be safe, and you have been listening to O.M.E. Boxing.